Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first challenge area session for autonomy and independence. My name is Adriana, Ríos, Rincón, and let me talk a little bit about myself. I earned a bachelor in occupational therapy at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia and a master in biomedical sciences at the Universidad de los Andes, both in Bogotá, Colombia. I earned a PhD in rehabilitation science at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. My academic career began as an assistant professor at the Universidad del Rosario in Colombia as well, where I served as the director of a master program in rehabilitation science over a year. Currently, I am an assistant professor at the Department of Occupational Therapy at the University of Alberta. I am also an adjunct professor at the Faculty of Health at the University of Waterloo. I am an age-well researcher in the areas of autonomy and independence and cognitive health and dementia. My research program is focused on studying the effects of implementing advanced technologies on the occupational performance, functioning, and social participation of people with disabilities and older adults. A substantial component of my current research is devoted to investigating the use of assistive technology to assess and promote cognitive skills and engagement in play in individuals with disabilities, mainly those with motor and cognitive impairment, including older adults living with dementia. I want to increase the understanding of how technology supports the health and wellness of individuals with disabilities through engagement in play, and also older adults. We are here very excited to have 3 epic presentations as part of today's session by speakers Dosso, Busola, Adekoya, and Yuriko, Ryan, and Kale Smilovsky. I am so glad to be here sharing this session, and I think this is a great opportunity to learn. Challenge area presentation will take place on Zoom from 1 to 2:30 Eastern time on Tuesday to Thursday this week, and will continue every day next week. On Friday, May 26th, join us for an EPIC conference workshop addressing barriers and facilitators to technology implementation, presented by Executive Director of the Center of Implementation, Julia E. Moore. Those who attend the full session live will receive a certificate of completion. I encourage you to check out the Age-Well EPIC conference webpage for additional details and registration information. And some housekeeping. Today's session will be comprised of 3 oral presentations, a 5 minutes question and answer following each presenter, and an overall discussion with general Q&A that places at presentations in a larger discourse and addresses potential research impact. All attendees are encouraged to use the Q&A box to ask questions, leave a comment on a question, and on both questions that others have submitted. The session is being recorded and will be available for playback. Links to playback will be posted on the EPIC conference webpage at the Age-Well YouTube channel. Now it was shorter than it's supposed, so maybe we can start our presentations. I think it's not a problem to start a little earlier.
It's totally fine to start earlier. It just means that you're an amazing chair. Thanks so much.
Oh, good. Very concise. Okay, so I will turn things over. Our first presenter is Jill Dosso. So Jill Dosso is an insert postdoctoral fellow in neurology in the Neuroscience Engagement and Smart Tech Lab at the University of British Columbia. As a patient experience researcher, She focuses on how real users perceive, interact, and relate with social robots and other emerging technologies. She is passionate about working with older adults, persons with lived experience of dementia, and families with lived experience of pediatric anxiety to co-develop devices that are both ethical and helpful. Dr. Dosso also holds a PhD in neuroscience from UBC and a master's in psychology from Toronto Metropolitan University. So I invite Dr. Dosso to share your screen and give your 10-minute presentation.
Thank you so much. So as Adriana said, my name is Jill Dosso. I'm a postdoc at the University of British Columbia in the Neuroscience Engagement and Smart Tech Lab. And today I'm going to be speaking with you about some work our group did on older adult perspectives on emotionality in social robotics. And a quote from one of our users was, "It has to meet you where you are." And I'm speaking to you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Social robots are devices whose main function is to interact and connect with people and to complete objectives that way. And they might look like a little character, a little person, or they might look like a pet. So some are made of hard materials, some are soft and touchable, and they have a variety of form factors. These have been proposed for a variety of applications, some that really lean into this social functionality, so they can be used for companionship for a user, as a source of comforting touch, or for more telepresence type applications, so facilitating voice or video calls with other people. And increasingly, we're seeing social robotics that are developed for health applications. So this might look like leading a group in some kind of physical therapy exercises. This might look like pain monitoring of a user or fall monitoring. And this might also include dispensing medication and potentially sending a report about whether or not that medication has been picked up, and that can be sent to other authorized users. There we go. So the COVID-19 pandemic has really accelerated interest and adoption of social robotics, with one example being in New York State last year. The state purchased and distributed about 800 robots for older adults. And these were specifically these LEQ robots that you see here, which can lead a user in a breathing exercise, can give them reminders, can help them set up calls with other people and other functions like that. However, there are a number of barriers to social robot adoption. So the first that I want to mention is a real need for end user involvement. Some data has shown that there can be a mismatch in what potential users want from a social robot and what roboticists are designing or think that users want. And this is going to lead to robots being developed that are not really what users would hope for. There can be a lack of emotional alignment in social robotics that can be a barrier to them being used. So there's some data showing that people are more likely to like a robot if it mirrors their emotional state. And when people connect with other people, this is a huge component of connection, is having the same read on the situation. And so the more social robots can have this emotional alignment, the more we speculate that they will be adopted, but that's something I'll talk more about in a little bit. And then another barrier that I want to point out is the potential for stigma around assistive technology use among older adults. So some users tell us that robots can be seen as embarrassing or infantilizing, or that they're concerned that being seen to use the robot might evoke negative stereotypes about aging, like being seen as isolated or dependent. So to think about these barriers to adoption, the purpose of the current study was to explore some ways of addressing these barriers through co-creation workshops with older adults. So working directly with users to think about what a robot could look like that would address some of these issues. And to do all of this work, we worked closely with a lived experience expert group that we called the League. So this was a group of older adults who either had lived experiences of dementia for themselves or were current or former care partners of someone living with dementia. So they were involved in choosing the research questions, in designing the workshops. We talked to them in the analysis stage, and we're just so grateful for their feedback kind of at all stages. So what these workshops looked like is they were 90 minutes and they were online via Zoom. So we ran 4 workshops with older adults without lived experiences of dementia, kind of 4 to 6 people in a workshop. And then we ran 3 workshops that were a mix of persons living with dementia themselves, as well as some current and former care partners. And what happened in these workshops, actually, the first thing we did is we had one-on-one calls with all of our participants to talk about the consent process, make sure their Zoom connection worked, and give kind of a beforehand attitude scale about robotics. And then during the workshops, what happened is first we had a demonstration of a robot called Miro. That's this first one. So the facilitator physically had Miro on the Zoom call, could show its features. And we had some kind of question and answer about what Miro can do. Then all of the participants had a chance to fill out the psychosocial impact of assistive devices scale, which I'll circle back to in a second. Then we had a video of a research prototype robot called T-Top, which is not commercially available, but has a really wide variety of social robot functions. So this was helpful in kind of seeding the discussion of what social robots could do. And then we had a group discussion about potential applications of social robots, about emotionality, and about the potential for stigma. So first I'll present some data from this impact of the device scale. This is called the PIADS. So we did a bit of a spin on the PIADS where we asked people how they thought they would be affected by the device. Often this is given when somebody is actually using an assistive device in their daily life. So what participants do is they're given a set of 26 terms, things like independent, willing to cope with change, and they have to indicate whether they think using the device would increase or decrease that feature for them. So a positive score indicates that they think they would increase on that feature, and a negative score indicates they think they would decrease. Here I'm just going to present the data from the care partners and the healthy older adults, because we only had 2 persons living with dementia, so their data is really noisy. But what we saw when people did these ratings is overall people anticipated that using Miro, the social robot, would lead to an increase in adaptability and maybe competence and self-esteem as well. So next I want to talk about what we heard in the discussion. So one of our big topics was about social uses of the robots, what that could look like and what was desirable. So one of the big themes we heard was that people were interested in robots that would support their communication with other people. We heard this in all 7 of our workshops. So people suggested functions like helping a user put names to faces. If I'm interacting with someone and I can't bring their name up, maybe the robot could help me with that. The possibility of using the robot to record memories. If somebody's telling stories about their childhood, maybe the robot could make a recording of that could be shared with others. One of our participants talked about, sometimes the person that I'm caring for has issues during the day. It would be great if he could leave a message with the robot and that would prompt us to discuss it when I got home. Not as a violation of privacy, but just another way of making that connection that everyone is on board with. And we also heard about applications like helping with phone or email, which some social robots are already doing. The other thing we heard about in terms of social uses was having a social relationship with the robot itself. So people talked about the feeling of being listened to. They talked about pet-like responses from the robot, so wagging its tail or shaking its head, giving that feeling that there's a two-way interaction happening. When we think about emotional displays from the robot, we talked about 2 different scenarios. One scenario was that the robot would only ever display positive emotions, and then the other was that it would display both positive and negative. And we heard some really nuanced feedback about how this would play out. So on the positive side, one person with dementia said to get a positive reaction, sort of a loving reaction, I think that would be great. On the other hand, one of our care partners said, I would be afraid that it's always just happy. And that would be kind of false to me. On the other hand, when we think about the robot displaying a more complex set of emotions, one care partner thought this could be really useful. They talked about a scenario where a robot dog is unhappy that it hasn't been walked, and this prompts the user to take it on a walk, and then it's happy, and this is a positive interaction for everyone. On the other hand, another one of our care partners talked about the possibility that the robot displaying negative emotions would be really fear-inducing for a user. So this was really helpful to really get into like the nitty-gritty of this topic with our workshops. And the last discussion element I want to talk about is the nature of using a robot with others. And different participants had different perspectives about the role that the robot would play in the social interaction. So one said the robot could be a participant. The robot could join in the conversation. We would have a good old time. On the other hand, some pictured it differently and said things like, I'm already socializing with my friends, so the social companionship of Miro wouldn't be needed in this case. And the last piece of the robots with others conversation that I want to talk about is this idea of stigma. And we heard some things here that honestly, like I didn't anticipate we would hear. So this was really, really helpful to talk to actual potential end users to get this feedback. So one of our participants said they were really concerned that by using the robot publicly, people would question their competence and that this would lead to them experiencing more stigma. But the other perspective that we heard was from one of our users who said, being able to say, yeah, this is our companion, her name is whatever, and we have it because my husband lives with dementia. And this allows him to remain more functional. And just that ability to be in the public space, use that as a calling card, that sounds to me like a terrific use. And we heard this from a couple different users that using a robot publicly as an assistive device could lead them to connect with others and to maybe share information about what it's like to live with dementia. So this was really valuable for us. So to wrap up, a couple limitations of the way we did this that I wanted to point out. There's always a possibility of selection bias. All of our participants are volunteers who said they wanted to participate in a study about robots and technology, and they did it over Zoom. So this is obviously not representing every older adult experience. We weren't able to have a real robot interaction between participants and a device because this was in the COVID-19 pandemic. And we got relatively limited dementia-specific feedback. We heard from a number of care partners, but not a lot of individuals living with dementia themselves. So this is something we would love to do more of in the future. But I want to end on some insights for robot developers and for people who want to facilitate adoption of these devices in the future. So one thing we heard is that the design of robots really requires care to avoid the potential for infantilization and stigma for users. We suggest that the emotional range of the device should be customizable by the user. And some of the things that we heard that we think could really help promote the adoption of social robots was their possibility of starting conversations about aging and living with dementia, facilitating connections between people, and supporting adaptability and self-esteem in the user. So I want to thank the league members, our older adult expert group who provided so much really helpful feedback, some of our collaborators who provided study materials, funding from AgeWell, from the New Frontiers in Research Fund, and from CCNA, and of course the audience for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dosso, for your amazing presentation. This is always for me, and I think for many people in the audience, is very exciting to hear about robots. I have personally some experience working with robotic systems, and it's very, very, very exciting. So I'm checking with the questions that we have, because now we have time for questions. And the first question is, will you be moving into robot interaction to find which type of robot appeals most?
Sorry, will we be moving into interaction?
Yes.
Yes, the answer is yes. I don't want to talk too much about ongoing work, but absolutely, in the future, we want to be doing studies where we're having real robot interactions between older adults, people with dementia, care partners. We're also doing some fun stuff, comparing what older adults need versus what children need, because that can be very different. So that, yeah, absolutely, as restrictions change, that's something we want to do.
Perfect. Okay, so I have some other questions here. Thank you so much for your presentation, Jill. What do you think is the role of physical touch in developing robotic systems and other devices, such as smart home technology for aging consumers? How might it impact their ease of use and adoption?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is something that we hear from users, is that touch is really important. A lot of the earlier, maybe I should say earlier, a lot of existing social robots for older adults are soft. So probably one that's received a huge amount of study is Pero, which is a large robotic seal that has fur. And users often say this is something they want, this is something they like. But when it's used in more of a healthcare setting where it's used by a lot of users and has to be cleaned a lot, this can also be challenging. So there's pros and cons. Yeah, so we hear different things kind of about different contexts. And I think really the solution is to have many different form factors of robots available, or maybe even a single robot that has different customizations, depending on how it's being used. But this is something we've heard from users who are supporting someone living with dementia, is that being able to pet the robot, hold it in your lap, have a little bit more of that pet experience, especially in contexts where a live pet isn't able to be, that's often really appealing and really reassuring for users.
Great. I think we can answer with the last question. So this study is to improve this social robot in collaboration with the industry that produce these robots, or to see the impact on people with dementia to introduce these robots to their life, and thus it have some positive kind of healing process, or improve their mind and cognitive ability as well.
Yeah, so I think the question is the aim of the robot to actually improve someone's cognition, or is it more about quality of life? Is that correct?
Yes, I think the aim of the study in general. Yeah.
So in this particular study, we're not looking at outcomes of actually using a robot. So we're not measuring impact on cognition or even impact on, happiness or quality of life. This is at this point still hypothetical. How would you want to use a robot? And we did that one scale, but it was, how do you think you would be affected? So yeah, we need to definitely do some more downstream work to see what these impacts actually look like. A lot of the robot work that's been done by others to this point has been a little more focused on quality of life as opposed to like cognitive improvements or cognitive training, something like that. But I do think people are looking into that. I think there's just different robots for all different kinds of things. So some are trying to do that and some have other goals.
Thank you, Jill. So we have more questions, but I think we need to take that questions for the end, because we need to welcome our second presenters. So I will welcome Busola Adekoya and Yuriko Ryan. Busola Adekoya is a registered nurse and PhD candidate in the School of Public Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo under the supervision of Dr. Lily Liu. Busola is passionate about the rights of older adults to receive quality care and maintain optimal quality of life. Her current research focuses on persons living with dementia at risk of going missing and how policies and programs for alert system are developed and implemented in Canada and Scotland. Yuriko Ryan holds a doctorate in bioethics from Loyola University of Chicago and an MA in gerontology from Simon Fraser University. She is a certified healthcare ethics consultant through the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities. She has worked in Canadian healthcare for 23 years, with interests in a wide range of topics that span clinical ethics, research ethics, public health ethics, and health systems and organizational ethics. So welcome, and we are so excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And as Adriana said, my name is Busola Adekoya, and I'll be presenting with Yuriko Ryan today. Just a quick introduction of the Aging and Innovation Research Program team who were involved, the team members that were involved in the project. And I would like to say a big thank you to Adriel. Thank you so much for your support. And I have Yuriko here that will be sharing perspectives on the results of the study. So here is some background information. We know that persons living with dementia will go missing. They are at risk of being exposed to serious injuries, including death. And alert systems notify the public about a missing person living with dementia by providing their personal information, such as the name, the age, physical descriptions. And alert systems allow first responders and the community to work together to locate the missing person. We did a scope and review study a while back, about a few months ago, and our study revealed a limited understanding of the concerns associated with the release of missing individuals' personal information to the public using alert systems. So, the objective of our study. Our study aimed to explore the stakeholders' perspectives on the ethical and legal issues associated with the release of personal information in alert systems. To our methods, we conducted in-person and online interviews via Zoom with 18 participants, including persons living with dementia, care partners, service providers, first responders, ethicists, lawyers, policymakers, from 4 provinces in Canada: Saskatchewan, BC, Alberta, Ontario, as well as Edinburgh in Scotland. All interviews were recorded and transcribed, and transcripts were analyzed for key themes using thematic analysis. So our results, we identified 5 key themes that represent ethical and legal issues in the use of alert systems. So I'm going to be talking about the key themes, and Yuriko will be providing our perspectives on them. So the first key theme is balancing safety and privacy. We'll learn from the participants that there is a need to balance safety and privacy concerns. However, this can be challenging based on the urgent nature of finding the missing person. You know, when a person goes missing, the hope or the prayer is that we find them alive. And so this kind of make it really challenging. So I have 2 quotes here, but I really love the quotes. The one that I'm going to read is from the person living with dementia. It says, it's really difficult because there are 2 different points here that are against each other. Because if they are out and these alert systems can find them and bring them home, that would be great. But there is the issue with privacy. So we cannot throw away privacy concerns. And Yuriko, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, in terms of balancing safety and privacy, a relevant ethical question may be, do we have data to back up an argument that the current silver alert system achieved the intended outcomes with minimum impact to the privacy interest of the missing person? Is there a less intrusive way to achieve the same outcomes?
Yeah, I totally agree. Looking at what are the benefits and the effectiveness of alert systems. So the second key theme is risk of vulnerability. we heard from participants that public disclosure of personal information can actually make the person living with dementia and their care partners to be more vulnerable to harm, such as crime or scams, depending on the type of information being released to the public. So when we're talking about personal information, we usually hear about medical conditions. So for example, the dementia diagnosis. So here is a quote from a search and rescue personnel that I think it kind of really captures what we're trying to say here. If people believe medical conditions, even though as important as this information is to include in what is being released to the public, it can put older adults at risk of harm just because of people with evil intentions out there. What do you think, Yuriko?
Yeah, this is a very important topic. In a clinical world, releasing one's medical condition requires layers of permission, as you know, following specific protocols and processes defined in relevant legislations and laws. But in non-clinical settings such as this, there is a gap. Is sharing medical information of missing seniors absolutely necessary? Should we have legislations to address this gap?
Very great points. To my own knowledge, there is no legislation right now on that. And so it will be kind of really interesting to see what's the outcomes or the impact that this research is going to have on making everything safe and clear for us to be able to locate missing persons. So I'll move on to the next key theme, which is social stigma and shame. If we are to be honest with ourselves, we know that negative perceptions about persons living with dementia still exist in society today. And the negative perceptions can make adding to that layer, going missing, can result in stigma and shame, not only for the person living with dementia, but also for their loved ones. And so we have, again, two wonderful quotes here. And I'm going to read the one from the search and rescue personnel. It says, if you pull the dementia piece out of it, there is a stigma with being a missing person. And so that part, to layer on top of that medical condition, that is also stigmatized, not positively viewed by and large, and makes it all the worse. Yuriko, what were you thinking when I read this quote?
Yeah, in recent years, we hear a lot about diversity, inclusion, and equity. In a culture where such discussions do not adequately address age-based discrimination or stigma associated with dementia, silver alerts may actually make the stereotypical profile of persons living with dementia even worse. So this becomes a social justice issue, and the stigma itself becomes a social determinant of health.
Mm-hmm. I really like that we're bringing in the lens of the social determinants of health into this. So moving on to the next key theme is informed consent. And participants discussed the importance of informed consent, that is understanding what an alert system entails and the consequences of using or not using it. Therefore, having early conversations about alert systems and understanding the wishes of persons living with dementia is important. And we know when the person goes missing, they won't be able to provide consent to the release of their personal information. So substitute decision makers or family members should be able to do this. And there are two beautiful quotes, and I'm reading the one from the lawyer. It says, assuming that they are competent, they have the same legal and human rights as a person who is completely competent. While a person is competent, they could actually give their consent to having information released in using an alert system. It becomes more complicated where they have never addressed the issue. And I think it speaks to why we are still really not talking enough about informed consent in the use of alert systems. What are your thoughts, Yuriko?
Yeah, this is a very important topic. Development of informed consent has a long history, dated back in the time of the Hippocratic text. In modern times, the medical and research fields learned the lessons from the Nazi doctors' experiments and many other research scandals. They have worked really hard to develop the informed consent principles currently used. However, informed consent outside of clinical or research setting is an absolutely under discussed ethics topic, and we need to talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not an easy decision, I must say, even from my own experience working as a registered nurse. The last key theme, education and support, speaks to the need for the public to understand dementia and provide support for people with dementia to live independently and age in their homes and community. So I'm going to read the quote from a person living with dementia that says, "We support people with other disabilities to do as much as they can for themselves, to live as independently as they like with the support in place. We tend not to do that with people with dementia. We lock them on the locked unit and we say, well, they might get lost." What do you think, Yuriko?
Yeah, in order to improve dementia education support, we may actually ask ourselves philosophical and ethical questions as a starting point. If a person's moral importance is determined based on cognitive capacity alone, is it ethical? And how about their capacity to form relationships and experience feelings? If we recognize their moral importance of persons with dementia, we need to advocate for their human rights and welfare interests so that governments and society act appropriately. That's my concluding comment.
Yeah, I agree. And in conclusion, we know public disclosure of personal information can help us locate missing persons, but we need to balance this with privacy concerns. And education and support are critical in addressing stigma and shame associated with dementia. We need to have those early conversations and involve persons living with dementia to understand their wishes. I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sola and Yuriko, for this amazing presentation of this topic that is very critical and important to be discussed, right? So thank you so much. I love your presentation. And I think the audience as well. So now it's time for questions. So I will be helping with the questions from the audience for Busola and Yuriko. Okay, so maybe we can start talking about how did you start this work together? It was the format of your presentation was great. So yeah, very interesting the way in which you present the issue and how ethical principles can help explaining the issue. So maybe you can share with us how this dynamic of working together around this topic started.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I can go. I think it's kind of really interesting because we're talking about ethical and legal issues, and they mean different things to different people, even though we might agree on some concerns. And I just thought it was kind of really nice to have Yuriko to bring her own perspective as a bioethicist, because they view it, in a lens. We're talking about ethical issues, right? So we need an expert to talk about it. So, and it's kind of really been interesting to hear her perspective, and the way she would view those concerns compared to the way a person living with dementia, even compared to the way I view those concerns, they are different. So it kind of brings an interesting perspective to it and kind of to understand the whole picture.
Yeah, I just wanted to I add that I actually have thought about this issues from, of course, a researcher lens, but also, as ethicist lens. But also I have my personal experience with my own grandfather, who in his the last couple of years in his life, and he started walking pretty long distance in every morning, and that really became a major social security concern for the family. And I have lived the experience on this topic, so I was able to actually bring my personal experience to this conversation. I hope I could be involved more in their research project team in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Busola and Yuriko, we have one question that I will read. Do you believe there is an achievable ideal balance between privacy and disclosure? Should alert be personalizable for the amount of information that can be revealed according to the wishes of the family?
That's a very good question. Can we achieve that ideal balance? I don't think so. I think it has to be on a case-by-case basis. And again, I mentioned earlier about the urgency of the missing person, or finding the missing person. So if a person goes missing when it is -30, it's different from when they go missing when the weather is great. And it's also different from when they go missing when it's +30. So it's kind of bringing in so many perspectives. But should alerts be personalized to the amount of info that can be revealed according to the wishes of the family? I would say absolutely. And that is why we need to involve persons living with dementia and care partners. Before they go missing, we need to have the conversations. And I don't think we talk about it enough. When people are being diagnosed with dementia, it's like I've heard from family members, it's like they don't receive the information that they really need at that particular time. What about the follow-up after being diagnosed and receiving the information and letting them know that there is a risk of your loved one or the person going missing? So we are not really talking about it. So if we talk about it, then we would understand what needs to be done, and we'll understand the wishes of family members and care partners. But if we don't talk about it, how do we know what we need to do?
Thank you, Busola. Okay, so we don't have more time for questions for now. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation. And I am welcoming our third presenter, Kale Smilovsky. So Kale is the research coordinator for the Space-Time Indices for Clinical Support implementation team. His interests include harm reduction and healthcare-focused qualitative research and knowledge translation. Kale is currently completing a MA in community psychology at Wilfrid Laurier University. He enjoys wearing kilts. So welcome, Kale, and so the stage is yours.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and we'll get started. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on the implementation and ethical aspects of RTLS in aged care and research. My name is Kyle Smilovsky. I'm a master's student at Wilfrid Laurier University and the research assistant on the STIX implementation grants. We'll start by describing the theory and background of our research, and then the STIX implementation project, or STIXI, which informs our presentation today. We'll then share some of our findings from phase 3 of this project. An increase in the number of older adults with cognitive impairment living in long-term care homes and insufficient staff resources is driving decision makers' interest in artificial technology and related technologies for continuous surveillance, automation, and prediction of clinically significant events. The use of these technologies introduces ethical dilemmas, and it can threaten core values and preferences. This can regard freedom, privacy, dignity, independence, or even safety. There is a striking lack of research in this area, including empirical research that explores impact and perspectives in the original place and an absence of formal guidance and policy in this area. Now, real-time location systems consist of a software application and reference points. They detect and synthesize positioning data from wireless tags or transmitters that can be attached to objects or peoples, as you can see the bracelet in the picture. Our RTLS technology partner is TeneraCare. Now, when it comes to integrating values into design and use, some value-sensitive design reflection questions are, what is the overall goal of the technology? What is the social context in which the technology will be situated? what values are at stake, and which stakeholders are legitimately impacted. Now, technological design and use is a value-laden practice. That is, it reflects specific ideas about what is desirable or important in terms of the impact or uses of technology in the world. Both culture and context will inform these values, but some examples of common human values are trust, freedom, respect, privacy, autonomy, security. So as per values-sensitive design from Friedman in 2002, elicitation of those values and reflection on them during development of technologies is crucial for adoption. This will ensure that technologies are useful and ethical. Given the limited research on RTLS in long-term care spaces, we don't yet know what different stakeholders, those who interact with the technology, value about it, or how they would like to be used in practice. There will also likely be value tensions within, which is what individuals say versus what they actually do in practice, and between stakeholders. And that could be what family carers versus institutional decision makers want for RTLS. And these have to be balanced. So a brief overview of this project is that in the first stage, we reviewed academic empirical studies of implementation of RTLS in long-term care for people with cognitive disabilities like dementia. We did this from MBASE, CINHL, Medline, PsycInfo. And then in phase 2, we conducted a mixed methods pilot implementation. And now we're in the beginning of phase 3. And this is a qualitative, longitudinal implementation study. This is done with residents, care partners, and direct care staff and organizational decision makers in one home. The objectives of this are to explore the attitudes and experiences of these groups regarding their adoption of RTLS with the goal of identifying specific values and preferences. We'll describe the impact of RTLS on these groups. We'll identify the individual and organizational values and preferences and the technical features that influence stakeholders' decision-making with respect to adoption and refusal of RTLS over time. The methods we used were surveys that covered demographic and attitudes toward technology at baseline, and then semi-structured, in-depth interviews at baseline and 6 months post-implementation. This study was conducted in a long-term care home in Ontario, owned and managed by a third-party service company. This company implemented TeneraCare, the RTLS system, in 2022. You can see an example of one of the floor layouts to the right. For the purpose of this study, 19 care partners, that is family members, substitute decision makers, and friends were recruited, 3 residents, and 16 decision makers. Now this includes managerial staff at the home and a part of the management company, as well as direct care staff. Beginning at a very high level deduction of initial results at the top right, you can see these preliminary results of individual groups' self-reported confidence in learning new technology. So you can note the high rate of acceptance among decision makers and care partners, as well as a mixed reaction from the residents. This is coming along with the actual understanding of the technology at hand being quite low, as seen in the qualitative interviews. Now you can now see the self-report data of participants' ethno-racial background and education level across participant groups for context of the research. And while we asked several questions on the survey, we wanted to highlight just 2 today. Participants were asked to rate on a scale of their acceptance of the use of RTLS technology to track movement of staff and of patients living with dementia. As you can see from the slide, our decision makers were much more accepting of tracking patients than they were of themselves. Below is some preliminary direct quotes from the qualitative portion of the study, highlighting some of the concerns and some of the endorsements for RTLS in their workspace. We also see a high rate of acceptance among care partners and residents despite privacy, data security, and confidentiality concerns. Most of the concerns when it comes to care partners were related to issues of quality of care and safety, indicating the high acceptance among them. Now, our final theme focused on the differences in values between the various stakeholder groups, the power relationships between them, and their ability to influence decisions depending on the organization and setting. These discussions in the papers were rare, but important in our view. Stakeholder perspectives included residents who were generally passive recipients of the technology, which was described as being good for them, and designed to improve their independence and safety despite limited research to support those claims. Family members who as substitute decision makers in these conjugate settings work on behalf of the residents. They are generally supportive of RTLS when they believe that it will enhance the residents' physical safety by preventing such things as altercations with another resident or neglect by staff. These issues appear to take primacy over their concerns around residents' privacy and autonomy as a result of pervasive surveillance. Care providers who control the use of RTLS see it as a quick and more efficient way to locate residents or remotely monitor their movement in real time, yet reject the use of RTLS to locate and monitor their own activities. Organizations focus their rationale for use on mitigating the liabilities of high-risk practices and to prevent injury or harm to residents. They weighed the total cost of these implementations against reduced institutional risk and improvements to their reputation. The use of RTLS and other surveillance technologies in the care of older adults, especially those living with dementia, is increasing in all aged care environments, whether the community, retirement homes, long-term care, or tertiary care settings. There are a number of considerations that may differ by care setting. First, a proportional response to risk balances benefits and harms and considers all options before committing to a particular technology. Second, there are no shortcuts when it comes to robust staff training. On-site technical support and technology champions who will support adoption and sustain it in use. Third, for the developers and researchers in the audience, you might co-design the technology and implementation plan with stakeholders, that is staff, care partners, and where possible, residents themselves. You need to do this early and often and build products with functionality that can be adapted to the related policies and procedures in each care setting, mitigating these value tensions before they occur. Finally, allow for informed level of adoption and refusal by those who are being monitored. That's it. I'd just like to acknowledge that we are presenting here today the collective work of a team of individuals who represent a wide number of disciplines, including gerontology, health services and policies, geriatric psychiatry, ethics, business, computer science, and engineering. So on behalf of the STIX teams, I'd just like to thank you for listening. If you have any questions about the literature review or our related STIX project, please contact either myself or Dr. Elisa Grigorovich at the email addresses on the screen. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much again for this amazing presentation of the usability of these monitoring systems. And I think your results are very interesting about the different perspectives of different stakeholders. So now we have time for questions for Kale. So I will check if we have any questions in the chat or in the questions and answer box. Okay, I think this question is for you. Can you share more about what it means to work on such a transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary team?
Well, the team doesn't usually work in tandem all the time. So we each have specific groups of us that are focused in certain areas. So I work mainly with 3 other PhDs, Josephine McMurray, Anne-Marie Levy, and Elisa Grigorovich. And we come together and focus on our part of the research, which is the qualitative implementation aspect, which is a part of the larger STIX project. So it's a little easier that way, and luckily I have a wonderful team.
Thank you. We have one more question. So thank you for your presentation, Kale. What do you believe are the biggest barriers to adoption for RTLS in care homes?
I would be split between answering that with sort of two aspects. And the first one is privacy and the ethics related to it. As a new technology related to any population will require it to be reconsidered and consciously implemented so that it is done properly. And the other thing is, especially in long-term care homes, is that technologically, each long-term care home will have its own sort of separate call bell system, which might have to be integrated separately by different engineering teams as they're not universal. And so when people are choosing this technology, you really have to look at the use cases, the funding, and who it's for to provide the best service. And it really is a large task.
Okay, there is another question here. Would you be able to go into more detail on why the caregiver nurses are more likely to recommend adopt tracking on their patients than themselves? This is a very good question.
Answering that at a high level of just sort of generally speaking on what I've learned so far. As in any sort of workplace, especially when it comes to managerial and frontline staff relations, the idea of monitoring someone's movements or where they're working has concerns, and it needs to be transparent and communicated openly. As you know, you don't want someone to watch you on your break or know where you're going for your time off. And so people want to know when and where it's happening, what it's being used for, so they can make an informed decision for themselves.
Thank you. And I see that Josephine is attending the session, so hello. And she's adding that regarding CNF, a question that cost is also an issue for the adoption of RTLS in long-term care facilities. There is another question here. In technology, who do you believe is responsible for ethical consideration?
Everyone is. When implementation occurs, as recommended, using people from all stakeholder positions. So we have, management, frontline care staff, care partners, residents, and whomever might else be involved would take that on as an ethical consideration across all things so you can get everyone's views.
Yeah, I agree with your answer. Yes. Okay, I think we have more time for one more question. Yes, there is already policies, regulations, and governance about privacy in general and patients' information. So are you working to modify or put more restrictions? And there are other solutions to find patients with dementia or similar health problems. Okay, one of the solutions is the location tags and bracelets.
So we are researching the implementation. We're not actually involved in the decision making. So there are other solutions other than tags and bracelets, just one of them. This is just the solution being chosen for this one pilot project. And as for the other policies, regulations, and governance, ideally the individuals are looking at that themselves. We are partly not the decision making, just looking at implementation.
Thank you so much, Carol. Well, I think that now we can open up the time for questions to all our panelists today. So please, when you write your question, who are you addressing the question to, so I can let them know. We have some questions here that were that we didn't have time before. So this question is for Busola and Yuriko. Great presentation, thank you. I'm curious to I'm curious to know why the study focused on both Canada and Scotland, and if you note any differences between the two contexts.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. So the focus of the study, or the purpose of the study, was not to compare alert systems, but yes, we noticed some differences. For example, in Scotland, they are using the app-based alert system, and it's being managed by the Alzheimer's Society of Scotland. Whereas in Canada, the BC Silver Alert, the common one that we have, is a community-led initiative. And so the difference between Canada's alert system and Scotland's alert system is how it's been managed. Like I said, the Alzheimer's Society of Scotland manages that, and care partners can actually add information about their loved ones before they go missing on the app. And if they go missing, anybody that subscribes to the app can actually download the information and contact family members directly if they find a missing person. But it's kind of a little bit different in Canada because we don't have such an alert system. The first alert, the app system, was being developed by Dr. Liliu and the team, but there are questions about that. So I'm not going to get into some of the privacy concerns and legislation regarding that. So it's kind of like really, really different. And why I chose Scotland, it was because I was really interested in knowing the differences and how things are being done differently in Scotland, particularly for my own thesis, which is kind of a little bit a different study for this one. It's kind of just to know how implementing the alert systems, how they were able to implement the alert systems. There are ongoing questions in Canada about privacy legislation, about not having legislation on alert systems itself. So it's kind of a little bit different. The decisions are still being, they are evolving in Canada. We are not yet there if you compare us to Scotland. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Thank you so much, Busola. And here in the Q&A chat, I have Josephine, Dr. Josephine McMurray is adding to the answer to the question about policies, regulations, and governance about privacy. So she said all the stakeholders are adhering to the policies and legislation regarding the collection of data or monitoring technologies. However, for successful implementation, where all stakeholders are actively engaged with the adoption process and with a shared understanding of the potential outcomes, organization will be wise to confer with all stakeholders prior to selection and purchase. Very important points. Thank you so much. I have one more question. Okay, this is for Busola as well. So Busola and Yuriko. Ethics can be intimidating topic for researchers. What advice would you give to new researchers hoping to include this view in their work?
Yeah, great question. Ethics can be really, really intimidating, but you need to plan ahead. You need to know what you want, the stakeholders, what would be their roles, what they are bringing to the table, and being clear when you're submitting your ethics proposal or application, being clear about how are you going to involve them, being clear about what are the risks associated with participating in the study and what are the benefits, and how are you going to mitigate the risk. I think just being clear and having that conversation, even with the stakeholders before you write the proposal, is kind of really important. It's part of integrating their outputs or their perception or their suggestions into the proposal. Is kind of really important. Have that prior conversation with them before you actually submit your ethics, to kind of have more clarity about how you want to involve them, how they would be involved, because sometimes they might not be involved throughout the process of the research. So it's kind of just being clear from the beginning. What do you want? How do you want to involve them? How are you going to protect their right to participate in the research?
I just wanted to add that, yeah, you're right. I get that questions very often. I go, ethics, whoa, what are you doing? And then that kind of puts a lot of people off. But I just wanted to share this good news. When I started taking ethics, bioethics courses, the very first moment I realized that this is a really good topic for myself, my professional development, because I recognized my own professional and personal biases in many different ways. So each of us brings our, professional history and personal views, and each of us has biases. So it's a great learning tool for anyone. I just want to share the good news.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's very important. We have a question for Jill. Did any participants express a concern that these social robots would replace or decrease time with caregivers or other people in their lives?
This is a great question. And yes, we do hear this from potential users, that a concern with social robots is that they'll take the place of interactions with other people instead of supporting them. So this is, and this is not only us that hears this. I think this is a really common theme in people who are considering kind of the ethics of social robot creation. I think robot functionality that is intended to not do this is things like the telepresence, where you can have a device that helps you call someone, that helps you video chat them. A hope that I think a lot of people have is that robots can take away some of the more repetitive, boring kind of parts of labor, and that would free up caregivers to do more of the human part of caring for people. But this is very dependent on how things get rolled out, on the specifics of what robots actually look like. So at this point, I'm not sure, which way it's gonna go. As robots get implemented, it's probably going to be really different in different contexts. But when we talk to potential users, that's a really common theme. And when we talk to care partners and all kinds of stakeholders, this is something that people are really concerned about, and that I think it's really important to consider as these robots are getting designed and these choices are getting made.
Thank you. I have more questions for you. So Samantha says, fantastic research. Was there any survey done of aging attitudes, positive versus negative views of aging? I find the stigma versus opportunity attitude may be concerned.
This is a great question. So in this set of workshops, we didn't ask any questions about attitudes about aging, either about yourself or about aging generally. I think it would be really interesting in future research to know how people's attitudes about aging impact their own willingness to use a robot. I also think it would be really interesting to turn the lens the other way and ask, for the public, how do attitudes about aging affect perceptions of seeing somebody use a robot? I don't know of any data kind of in either direction at this moment. But I think in research about other assistive technologies, stigma and attitudes definitely predict willingness to use. So I think that's like a really good factor that we should be considering as this goes forward. One other thing I wanted to say about the stigma and opportunity piece is, in one of our workshops particularly, we heard a lot of people talking about using the robot to connect with others and to open up conversations about dementia. And a lot of those participants were individuals that we recruited by contacting people who were already involved in dementia advocacy organizations. So I'm really grateful that we got that diversity of perspectives. So I think there are things happening in people's lives already that are kind of informing their perspectives on this.
Okay, good. Are you ready for one more question, Jill?
Let's do it.
So is your, oh my God, it moves. Okay, now is your, yes, that, you know, the chat.
Yeah, no,
moves.
I'm looking at it too.
No, but I found your question now. Is your robotic trained to deal with people with dementia who exhibit some behavioral issues or who can't speak clearly?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. So I'm not aware of any robots that are designed to like take an action when someone's exhibiting a particular behavior. I do think some robots have been designed more based on what people with dementia have expressed that they want. So often those are the more pet-like robots that are soft and cuddly and that maybe are kind of less sophisticated computers. So yeah, that's one kind of application. I'm not aware of any robots that are particularly designed to deal well with like speech that's difficult to understand. Some of the robots that do offer more of the telepresence applications, it's more analogous to like using Siri or a voice assistant. And so that is helpful for some cases, you know, where it's easier to use a function using speech as opposed to reading tiny text and things like that. So I think access is being addressed a little bit there. Yeah, but I think we're still in pretty early days of what this dementia specific functionality is really going to look like.
And maybe that question is related to one more question for you.
Mhm.
How is the future of social robots in the integration with ChatGPT and other AI bots in your point of view?
Yeah, this is a great question. Very topical. So yeah, I was just talking about these relatively simple pet-like robots that, you know, turn if you pet them, that move around. Kind of the other end of this is very sophisticated robots that can have a conversation back and forth that might look more like a person or like a person's head. And on the computer science side of things, there's a lot of interest in, you know, how do we teach these devices to converse? What is the underlying engine for that? And I think it's very likely that developments in AI, in large language models, are going to be used by that set of robot developers. Similarly, there's a really difficult, you know, computational problem of how do you get a robot to detect someone's emotion, to display an emotion, to, you know, how do we turn this human experience into something numerical? And I think that's another area that's moving really quickly and driven by kind of AI advances.
Yeah, that's very exciting topic. Okay, one more question for you.
Yeah.
In your investigation, has robot companions been tested as real pet replacement?
So I personally haven't run these studies, but there have been studies looking at users using a robotic pet in situations where they couldn't have a live pet. So often this is a healthcare situation where, you know, there's hygiene concerns or even concerns about maybe a user would love to have the experience of having a pet, but doesn't want the responsibility of, you know, caring for it and grooming it and feeding it every day. And in those applications, yeah, the pet-like robots do perform really well and are often really well liked. And that's something where there are commercial products that you can buy, like on Amazon, that do that. So that, yeah, that's an application that we do see, and that's like relatively successful.
Okay, so thank you. I've got a question for Kale. If you could pick 3 values when designing for technology for older adults, what would they be and why? Especially when thinking of people that are maybe new to the field.
The question is 3 values that are important for older adults.
For designing for technologies for older adults.
Well, you would have 2 pathways to go down at first, and that is whether or not they're able to consent for themselves. So whether they have a substitute decision maker or a care partner who's making those decisions for them. And then you would decide further along that point where to go. Because if you're talking to a care partner about what is best for the resident, you're going to get so far answers that mainly benefit the care partner's perception of safety for their resident. Whereas if you're talking to a resident directly and they're cognizant and able to respond, you'll get more genuine values from them. And so as long as you're able to look at those 2 different avenues you're going down, you'll then be able to have a proper sort of understanding of who you're dealing with to get the values from the person who's most important, which is the resident.
Thank you so much, Cam. Okay, I have some questions, but I first will read all the questions that we still have here in the chat. So there is one more question for Jill. Do you think robotics can fill the gap of shorter staff, especially in the long-term care facilities, like companions or doing activities?
Yeah, this is definitely something that there's conversations about. And a lot of people propose that robots could do this. A lot of people would hope that robots can do this. I don't know if we have data about whether or not robots will be effective at filling this gap. So there's a little humanoid robot called Now that was in some of my pictures that can lead activities, can do bingo. We have pet-like type robots for companionship. But if we look at data out of somewhere like Japan, where they've had more pressure on their older adult care system for longer, they've been using robots a lot more. But I don't know whether it's a clear-cut yes that the robots are actually reducing labor. I think some of the data says that the staff labor is just redirected from caring for the people to like maintaining the robot. I also think the current robots that we have, I don't know if they are where we would need them to be for this to be effective and for this to be welcomed and accepted by the actual users. So yeah, I think we don't really know. I think there's a lot of interest in robotics as a potential solution here. But it kind of remains to be seen how the products develop and how the system changes.
A following question is, many people spend a lot of money in their studies. If we use a robotic as filling the gap of shorter staff, do you think that will affect our education system, or it will help it?
So I think this question is now asking about robotics as deployed more for education as opposed to for care of older adults.
Well, for the same maybe purpose of helping with shorter staff and the link with the education of the new professionals. I think.
Oh,
that's the meaning of the question. That I think.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I hope I grasp.
Yeah, so if the robots are kind of addressing some of these like care shortages, so that free the staff up then to train other staff, that would be great. I hope that happens. I think we don't have enough data to know yet if that's how it's going to go. I think it really depends on the context and which robot and yeah, all of those caveats again. But I think the short answer is we don't know yet.
Yeah, it's maybe it's too early. I know about a robot that was developed in Japan that is Riva, that helps with moving patients, and it's a very nice robot because the robot has senses the touch of the patient, so it's very gentle and it's also very strong. So as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, but this robot is being used at least in some kind of pilot studies, moving patients in the hospitals. So I think it's very slow, the transition from research to implementing these technologies, but I think the most important thing maybe is to be aware that any robotic system will not harm people in any ways, I mean, physically or emotionally. And that's why, this research is very slow in implementing this autonomous robotic system. Also, I think the discussion is between the level of autonomy that this system may have, 100% autonomous or just operated by a human behind. Okay, any other questions? I will just wait a little bit for maybe more questions from the audience. We have still a couple of minutes. There are questions in the chat. Okay, so there is a question for everyone, I mean the panelists. When it comes to autonomy and independence, what do you think are the main challenges or opportunities?
I can give this one a shot.
Yes.
The main challenges are usually to have buy-in from all stakeholder groups involved. And that usually involves proper communication and transparency about the technology across all groups. And that has to also be maintained over time as things develop and change based on what they learn. So if you can have that, then you're going to have a higher buy-in and you can have more people doing it. But it can also be, a bit of a hindrance if people don't get involved early and often. And the possibilities for it are the most important thing, at least for in a long-term care home, is to improve the overall well-being of the individuals there, which is the goal of all these technologies, is to improve some aspect of their well-being so that they can have, higher clinical values and advantages and live a happier life. Because at least in a long-term care home, they're renting space in these homes to be safe and happy and to sort of have that end-of-life care. And so if properly implemented, they can be used very positively.
Thank you, Gail. I think in today's session, we had a very good panelist that gave us the opportunity to think about the tensions that are present when we talk about independence and autonomy, how technologies can support autonomy. That is not that clear as how they support independence, and how the use of examples of technologies such as robotics or tracking systems make some people uncomfortable, right? Because of privacy issues or or they can stigmatize, so affect the identity of older adults, and how ethics are very important to being implemented in all the stages of developing new technologies from the very, very, very early stages. And we need to have that in mind all the time in order to make technologies for older adults that are useful, acceptable, that will not harm them, that will not go against their identity, or maybe that can help their independence, but are not supporting the autonomy. So I just want to thank all our panelists today for this wonderful discussion. And I don't know if you want to add something else before we leave from your research or from, I don't know, a summary of this experience today.
Not a summary, but kind of to go back to that question about the challenges. I think the negative perceptions that already exist in society, we have not yet overcome. Like, we are still dealing with the negative perceptions. Even the self-stigma is still there, even for some people living with dementia, not having that opportunity to come out to say, I have dementia, I need support. And I think we need to do better. We are still struggling with it to address stigma associated with dementia. And I think that will be really important. And one of the opportunities that I believe technologies bring is for people, older adults in general, to live life to the fullest, especially people living with dementia. You know, when you get the diagnosis of dementia, it's like a death sentence for many people. It's like the right you have. They think you are not capable of doing things that you normally do. And that is not right. If we have the right support in place, they will be able to live life to the fullest and to enjoy the life that they want to live. And I think it's kind of really important that we reflect on that as society. How do we combat the stigma and the shame that's, you know, that have been there for a very long time? We're still struggling with it, and we really need to address that.
Thank you, Busola, for that reflection. Thank you so much. We have one more question for everybody. What are your hopes for the future of age tech in your field and in general?
I think something that I hope is that we'll see a continuation of this trend of involving actual end users in the development of products that are intended to serve them. I think that was a common theme in all of our talks today, which I was really glad for. And I think something that AgeWell really advocates for. So I think that's something I would really love to see continuing going forward, as well as a real value on the transparency of products. So where does your data go? Who is making this? I think, yeah, again, that's something we heard from all of us, is that, yeah, that's just really important for valuing the dignity of everyone who's involved in age tech.
I just wanted to add that, you know, we didn't talk about funding issues today, but, you know, just distributed justice is one of the, you know, major ethical discussion topics. And we have, in Canada, we have a very acute care heavy healthcare system funding portfolio. So our taxpayers' money go towards hospital-based care rather than community-based or chronic disease management support. So in order to actually really make the best use of technology to the, you know, to the well-being of seniors living with dementia in the community, we probably at some point need to discuss some, you know, funding distributive justice issues. That's my last comment. Thank you so much again for inviting me to this very interesting, important conversation.
And if I can quickly add to that, I think addressing the digital divide that still exists, and accessibility is really, really important for older adults to be able to purchase or to buy or to have access to what they need, the technology that they need. I think we still need some work to do in that area.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's something that we all share, that, you know, minimizing the digital divide gap is like mandatory. And we need to find ways to do that as we are working in the area of age tech. So thank you again. I enjoyed, as chair of this session, I enjoyed every single minute. I learned a lot from you, and I think the attendees also had a very great experience. So yeah, so thank you so much, and I think we are ready to finish our session.